It's been an awful long time since I've talked about an iceberg chart. The last time I did was way back in summer of 2021, which was the CSGO iceberg. Although I am proud of it, I feel I've grown quite a lot since then, as a content creator and as a person. In that video, I didn't even use a script, I just talked about the topics as I knew them. So let's do this the right way this time, shall we? So Pugsr, what is an iceberg video? Well, if you somehow haven't seen one, an iceberg chart video is a video where you go down the iceberg of a topic where the deeper you go, the more obscure the facts and theories get. So at the top, the facts are very well known, and near the bottom, the facts and theories are super obscure. I also would like to mention that a lot of these entries that are covered in this video are also covered in my videos called The Things You Don't Know About Fear and Hunger. So if you watched all of those in my channel, you'll recognize a good amount of these, but there are a few I did not cover in those videos, as well as some fun theories that I've come up with and that I've seen. I would love it if you left a comment and a like so I can do things like this more often, and it really does mean the most, and I love you all. Let's get into it. Starting with the very first layer and the very first entry, gods. Fear and Hunger is a supernatural horror game where there are entities called gods. There are several different classifications of these gods, like the old gods, the new gods, the ascended gods, and others. Understanding these gods is imperative to the series story-wise, as well as it is even a main gameplay focus in the second game with ritual circles and what they do. If you want to learn even more about each god, I would check out my video called The Gods of Fear and Hunger Explained. Berserk references. It's quite obvious that the Fear and Hunger series draws a ton of inspiration from the anime manga series Berserk, which is coincidentally my favorite anime and manga of all time. It's not quite subtle with its parallels either. Lagarde, a character in the game, is quite literally just Griffith with red hair, down to using the people that are close to him to become a godlike being so he can supposedly do good, even though he's doing horrible things to get there. The penance armor is also quite literally just the berserker armor from Berserk as well. The games are riddled with these references. The first game more than the second, but it's pretty easy to see the inspirations. Difficulty. Fear and Hunger is known for a few reasons, one of which is it is extremely challenging. I would say it is the hardest RPG Maker game that I can personally think of. But it's not necessarily traditionally hard, it's just really unforgiving. Its difficulty isn't from like fights or anything necessarily, but from the learning curve. In a way, the entire game is like a Dark Souls boss. You're going to have to fail over and over and over to learn things that you can and cannot do, as well as the patterns of the game. You cannot just brute force the game trying to fight every single enemy head on, because that simply just will not work. You will have to use a strategy, like using bear traps to cripple enemies before battles, or getting specific weapons to do status effects to enemies that are weak to it. And in most cases, just finding ways to avoid battle is the best strategy. Disturbing themes. This is probably the other thing that people think of when they think of Fear and Hunger. It's not a kid's game. It really doesn't hold back when it comes to scary and mature themes. Things like SA, depression, anxiety, and the state of the world that is on full display, and it doesn't really pull any punches. It isn't gratuitous, however, it just shows a lot of real-world things that we don't like to talk about. In addition to those, you have some expertly crafted creepy art, things like the Harvestmen, the God of Fear and Hunger, the Sulfur God, or Logic. Things that aren't in-your-face scary, but are unnatural and alien-looking. It is truly something special with the horrific art. It would be like if Silent Hill and Berserk had a baby. One of those creepy themes is also in the next entry. Marriages. This doesn't mean traditional marriages. This is marriages in the name of the old god of Sylvian in the Fear and Hunger universe, where the flesh of two beings literally become one through, well, sex. You have to have sex on a Sylvian ritual circle to become a marriage. The bodies will bubble together and become one entity. There are a couple of instances in this game and in this series, but the real horror comes from abominable marriages, where 3 or more people have a marriage, where the marriage doesn't quite work right, and it becomes this nasty amalgamation of people. There are also instances of people having marriages with animals, which is a whole can of worms in and of itself. Silent Hill references. Like we mentioned earlier, the art style of these games is very reminiscent of Silent Hill, and that's on purpose. The creator, named Miro Havernen, has said that the game is heavily inspired by it. Now, I've only played Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 2 Remake, so I don't catch all the references, except for one in Silent Hill 4, which we will talk about. So I'm not the best person to point all of these out, but there is clearly inspiration in the monsters. Different endings. Like all good RPGs, there are several different endings in the Fear and Hunger games, and all of them could be canon technically. Some involve you finding the meaning of destruction in the old gods' terms. Some help Lagarde become a new god and usher in a new age of peace. And some in the second game have you coming back from the dead as a servant of the sulfur god. None of them are particularly good, but the point is that there are several different endings which imply several different things. One of which is the logic ending in Fear and Hunger 2. A pretty difficult ending to get to, however a pretty well-known one. It involves you going through 3 different bunkers and turning on 3 different flesh machines, which brings you to the Bremen Empire's White Bunker underneath the museum in Prehevel. Here you will fight the Kaiser and Logic. Logic is an emerging god of technology, which by fighting, you and your party will be absorbed into it, and become part of the developing mass of collective beings that are all becoming one within Logic. This, however, leads the whole point of the game in the first place, the Termina Festival, to be cancelled for some reason, leaving everyone else not killed or absorbed to be free to leave unscathed. The reason it's cancelled is not really explained, but there is a theory later down the iceberg that may in fact explain it. Majora's Mask references. The second Fear and Hunger game draws several parallels with the Legend of Zelda game, Majora's Mask. Things like the 3-day time limit, the tower with the moon over it, the man and mastermind on the tower orchestrating the whole thing, and the fact that the game is just called Termina, which is the name of the country in Majora's Mask, and the overall dark themes. It's riddled with Majora's Mask references. Pocket Cat and Children. A servant of the moon god, Pocket Cat is an enigmatic figure in the Fear and Hunger universe. It seems he is a being that takes several different vessels and transfers either his ideals or consciousness itself between them. Another dark theme is that he seems to do something to children. Either kill them or a lot worse in the name of the moon god. It isn't really explained and it is left purposely ambiguous. If you want to learn more about it, I have a great video on Pocket Cat all about him, which you can see here. Miasma. Miasma is a very good sword in the first Fear and Hunger game, one of the best in the game actually. The way to obtain it is to kill the Crow Mauler, a seemingly unkillable boss that wanders around and stalks you. Although he seems unkillable at first, he actually isn't all that hard in the late game. Once you kill him, you have to loot his body and get the Crow Key. Take this back to the beginning of the game and use it on an impassable iron door, which will grant you access to the Miasma sword. It is extremely powerful, but be careful if you equip it when you are under a certain threshold of your mind stat, as the sword will cause you to go crazy and kill the rest of your party. That is, unless you give it to Lagarde or a skeleton, or you could just not drop below the mind threshold. It's a dangerous weapon, but it is one of the strongest weapons in the game, so it's up to you if you want to use it or not. The Sulfur God ending. Another ending in Fear and Hunger 2. If you play through the game normally, however, you kill everyone before the 3-day time limit and kill everyone in 2, Percola, the proctor of the Termina Festival, will offer you to be reborn as a sulfur cultist. He will tell you to kill him and then both of you will die and be sent to the sulfur pits, where you will be reborn and you will see the sulfur god, which if you want to learn more about it, you can see the explanation of all the endings here in this video. The talk option on Vile. A very difficult early game boss in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina, Vile is this guy with the pig mask and he may be a headache for first time players of Termina. He can both poison you as well as do some heavy damage with his gas can. However, an easy way to get past this boss without nearly any difficulty is just to talk to him. You can just use the talk ability and then keep asking him what he's saying. Eventually, he will lift up his gas mask, and if you succeed a coin toss, he will instantly die, giving you free access to Old Town, until a death mask comes and ruins your entire playthrough at least. Glass shards on Needles. Needles is once again a very hard early game boss in Termina, but his fight can also be trivialized pretty easily. If you pick up glass shards from anywhere in the game, you can actually throw it at his head with a pretty high success chance. And if they do hit, there is a chance that he will be blinded by these glass shards. Doing this will make him nearly miss every single attack. Then you can take him out easily and not have to worry about his headache through the rest of the game. Crow Mauler equals the Pyramid Head. We talked about the Crow Mauler and him being a very hard boss earlier, but an easy to draw conclusion is he is a lot like Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2. He will stalk you randomly throughout the game, as well as appear for the first time behind some bars just to stare at you, as well as has a weird head and a large weapon. Yet another Silent Hill 2 reference. Lagarde is the Kaiser. One of the main villains of Fear and Hunger 2 is Lagarde from the first game. Lagarde somehow achieved new godhood, but not in the way he wanted. So he is immortal, but not quite in the way he wanted. You can tell because his boss fight as the King in Yellow is the same as the Kaiser boss fight in Fear and Hunger 2, as well as Nashrad knowing him. Moon Scorching is your true self. This one is sort of weird, but it is nearly a confirmed theory that says when you moon scorch, which is when you're exposed to Rare's moonlight cancer for too long, you will transform into the worst parts of yourself, personified. You can tell by seeing all the horrible traits and fears displayed on your body when you moon scorch in-game, as well as the other Termina contestants. This theory states, however, this is sort of like the character's personal pyramid head from Silent Hill 2. So, sort of like the id of your personality displayed front and center. It is, however, inconclusive if this is true, despite it being all but confirmed. I have a great video on moon scorching here on the screen as well if you want to learn more about this. August is Ragnvaldr's descendant. The Termina contestant, August, is Ragnvaldr, the Outlander from the first game's descendant. Canonically, in the first game, Ragnvaldr befriended the wolf, Moonless. Then in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina, you can fight this very same wolf, and August will step in and say that Moonless is an old family friend, linking the two characters. August also looks a lot like Ragnvaldr with a kick-ass mustache. The Heartless One. A secret super boss in Fear and Hunger 2 is a new god named the Heartless One. This name will be changed in the next update, but for now, it is the Heartless One. The boss is probably the hardest boss in the series, and is very hard to encounter without knowing it's there. It involves you getting to the basement of the Church of Almer without breaking the chandelier. The two ways to do that are to go through the Foundations of Decay or use the Golden Gate skill. Once you are there, you have to pick up a rusty key and free the chained up new god in the basement. She will disappear and drop a heart-shaped locket. Sacrificing this locket at any new god ritual circle will summon the Heartless One, an incredibly hard super boss that you have to fight alone. She can attack several times per turn as well as inflict status effects. The best way to beat her is to either use poison or bleed, as well as using a brown vial in the middle of the battle. Beating her grants you probably one of the better weapons in the game, named the Red Virtue. Savable Pav and Samira. Two seemingly unsavable characters in the game is Samira, who will moonscorch if not gotten to on the first day morning all the way in the Church of Almer in the middle of the city, as well as Pav, someone who will fight the Kaiser underneath the Hollow Tower. But both can be saved. You can save Pav with a cloth fragment after the fight, and if you get to Samira on the first day, you can talk her out of moonscorching. Both of these characters can be saved if you do the logic ending after this. This is the only way to save these two characters, however. Different ways into Praheevil. In Fear and Hunger 2, the game requires you to get into the main city. There are several ways of doing so. The most obvious ways that most people will get is to get the two keys to the city through the two locations in Old Town. The first is the Telelectroscope bunker, and the second is by talking to the mayor. However, there is in fact 6 other ways you can get into the city as far as I know. You can lockpick the sewer gate as Marco and bypass the whole Old Town part of the game. You can get the keys to the sewer by helping Henrik by meeting him before going into the first Telelectroscope bunker. You can get lucky and find a pair of bolt cutters and just cut the chains off the gate. Or on that same route, you can just shoot the chain off with a shotgun. You can use a ritual circle in the abandoned house near the train with a Venushka symbol to cause a tree to grow into the forest and go that way. And finally, you can use the Golden Gate skill to go in one of the Golden Gates to get into the city. Lots of ways are not all that straightforward, but they are all possible. It is also possible I missed a way into the city that I can't think of, but that's all the ones I know of off the top of my head. 10% cave dwellers. In Fear and Hunger 1, there is an area with a bunch of cave dwellers. There is a 10% chance that when you get to the village, they will all be dead, and instead be replaced by moonless guards. Blights are new gods. In Fear and Hunger 1, once you get to the other side at the end of the game, you will encounter blights. Weird lizard men, but something more. The new gods describe them as other new gods that came long before all of us humans. Lizard men who also sat on the golden throne of Mahabra. So when you are fighting these weird T-Rex guys, remember, they are new gods. Ruin changes portraits. In the first Fear and Hunger game, there are some ghosts in the mines, which are very annoying enemies. They have a move called Ruin, which not only hurts your mind and kills you after 3 uses, it will actually permanently change your character portrait to an older version of themselves. Even the girl gets an older portrait if ruined. The sulfur god is Almer. A well-known theory states that Almer and the sulfur god are the same god, or at the very least, 2 sides of the same coin. In the game, books state that Almer discarded his humanity to ascend. It is thought and widely accepted that the humanity that festered in the sulfur pits and became freedom-loving sulfur god is in fact that humanity that Almer discarded. I talk more about that theory in this sulfur god video that I did a long time ago. Lagarde was going to be playable. In early versions of the game, Lagarde was discussed as being a playable character. Unused sprites have him doing things that only playable characters can do, such as holding the demon child and being tortured by Troder, which can only happen to playable characters, as well as unused dialogue of him suggesting a marriage with Darcy. Why this was changed is unknown, but I assume it's because of his extreme important status in the game as a character. Blue Sin. The Blue Sin is a sword in Fear and Hunger 1, which is the counterpart to the Red Virtue from the second game that we already kind of talked about. It is stuck in a rock in the mines in Fear and Hunger 1. Grabbing it seemingly will always cause a game over by collapsing the mines on you. However, there is a way to get it. If you have the book called The Passages of Mahabra, you can teleport to a section of Mahabra in a weird dreamlike state if you read it. If you use this book immediately after picking up the Blue Sin, but before the mines collapse, you can keep the sword and respawn in a unique collapsed mine location in the game. Pocket Cat's Room. In Fear and Hunger 2, there is a hidden room in the Golden Gates area. If you enter this little hidden door here, you can find Pocket Cat's Room, filled with stuffed animals as well as the doll from the girl in the first game. When Dan moonscorches into Pocket Cat late in Termina, the room will also change to seemingly show the crime scene of his late wife. The Tormented One is a Silent Hill 4 final boss. One of my favorite boss fights in the first Fear and Hunger game is the Tormented One. It is a super interesting and creepy looking design. Well, it is almost 1-for-1 inspired by the final boss of Silent Hill 4, The Room. I have never played this game myself, but if you look at it, the inspiration is kind of obvious. Pocket Cat model change. This one we sort of touched on earlier, but when Dan moonscorches into Pocket Cat, there are several subtle changes to him in Fear and Hunger 2. Before Pocket Cat moonscorches, he has his signature khaki pants and tall boots. But when Dan moonscorches and becomes the new Pocket Cat, his pants change to Dan's signature plaid pants. Like we also talked about, it also changes Pocket Cat's room in the Golden Gates area when he moonscorches. Sergal and the Heartless One. This refers that the 2 characters in the games that are based on YouTubers. By the way, hit me up, Miro. I'll be in Fear and Hunger 3 if you want me. Sergal is based on Neko the Sergal YouTuber, which was one of the very first YouTubers to play the Fear and Hunger beta, and the Heartless One is based on Heartless Angel Katsueki, which was a beta tester in the games. Speaking of which, beta versions. There are several beta versions of Fear and Hunger 1 and 2. The most famous of which is one of the betas for the first Fear and Hunger game, where a Nilvian, the Endless One, slits Lagarde's throat when you get to his cell, and then the Tormented One rises from the blood to fight you, which is vastly different from the finished product of both of these new gods. God of Fear and Hunger is Gluttony. This one is another Silent Hill reference, where the God of Fear and Hunger looks a lot like the Silent Hill enemy Gluttony, which is an enemy in Silent Hill 3. I apologize because I do not know much about Silent Hill 3, but I made a joke in an earlier video where I said they don't look anything alike, and I got a lot of comments calling me an idiot for not seeing it. The Sun God. This is a god that is referenced several times throughout the series, but is never actually seen or named. However, there are several theories on the Sun God itself. Some people believe that it is Grogroth, the god of destruction, and he is also the Sun God, according to them. If you look at his sigil, it looks a lot like an eclipse, which, the sun has to do with the eclipse. But I don't really subscribe to that theory. Some others believe it is the Sulfur God, which, once again, I don't really subscribe to. Nishra also mentions a fire god in the first game, which also might be the Sun God. There's also a theory that the sun in Mahabharata in the past is gone only because the Sun God has also left the world. However, the Moon God exists, so it would make sense if we were to get expanded lore about that in the next update, or in Fear and Hunger 3 about the Sun God. Fear and Hunger 3 is also supposedly supposed to have vampires in it, which, if you keep that in mind, I would assume we'll get more on the Sun God. The White Mold Murderer is the janitor from the intro of Termina. This is a pretty widely accepted theory that the murderer mentioned in the White Mold Apartment's Diary of a Madman journal is in fact the janitor that you fight in the intro of Termina. In the journal, it is mentioned that the killer is a janitor of the White Mold Apartments, and is a sulfur cultist. Well, in the intro, the janitor is named Janitor, and also has half of his face painted blue or burned blue, which is a signature look of a sulfur cultist. So it would make a lot of sense if these were the same person. Black Caleb extra scene. Black Caleb is a pretty well-known secret where if you go downstairs and use the rare sigil in the woodsman's house, you can find a human form of Black Caleb, and if you talk to him and answers his questions correctly, you can leave and find Black Caleb's goat form and take him with you on your journey. However, there is an extra scene if you go to any rare realm and sculpt an effigy of yourself 12 times. Here, Black Caleb's human form will once again appear and talk about some lore and theories about the Sulfur God. Black Caleb Darkness reference. Related to the last entry, weirdly enough, when Black Caleb asks you that question in the beginning, he will ask you what you think darkness means. You have the option to mention, I believe in a thing called love, which is a reference to the band The Darkness and their famous song, I Believe in a Thing Called Love. Moonless is a new god. This is a joke theory that I've seen in a couple places. Moonless, the wolf we mentioned earlier, who is Ragnvaldr's canonical companion, is a new god. The joke states that she changed into a new god after the events in Fear and Hunger 1. Someone brought her to the Golden Throne, and somehow she sat on it. We've seen lizard men do it, so I guess why can't a wolf? She is huge in Fear and Hunger 2 and somehow immortal, or at the very least very old, like 400 years old. So although it is a joke, I guess there is a non-zero chance it's true. Speaking of which, there is talks in-game about a wolf deity in the east. However, those have been around before even Moonless. So who knows why I even added this entry. White Mask. If you play as Osa, the Yellow Mage in Fear and Hunger 2, there's a chance you will get to do a choose your own adventure style intro instead of the usual one. If you do it and survive, you get a couple extra items. However, if you search a desk in this choose your own adventure story without breaking it open 14 times, you will receive a white key. This seemingly does nothing. However, if you go to the Golden Gates in the Golden Gate rare skill, you can find a different hidden door, like the Pocket Cat room door. There will be a door here that will always be locked. However, if you have the white key, you can open it. Here you will find a strange white room with strange faces all over it. You can also find a white mask, which seemingly does nothing. It may be a reference to Lisa the Painful, another creepy indie horror game, or it also could be a reference to the first game, where you can get a status effect by talking to Pocket Cat called Happy or Depressed. Who knows? But the mask does nothing when you equip it other than give you the status effect Happy, which once again does nothing. Shopkeeper kills baby. Another kind of funny entry, if you wait long enough in the shopkeeper's shop in Old Town in Fear and Hunger 2, there is a slight chance that the shopkeeper will beat his baby against the desk he is sitting at. I don't know how rare this is, but I've only ever seen it once, and it was after a very long time of waiting. The Sabbath is from the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. The Sabbath sword that you can get from using the Venushka symbol in the Church of Almer in Fear and Hunger 2 is a pretty good one-handed weapon if you can spare the sigil. Which, by the way, you shouldn't get it. It's not really worth it. But anyway, the sword is actually in Kahara's S-ending photo in Fear and Hunger 1. In that ending, Kahara finds the secret treasures of the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. And in this photo, it implies that this sword is one of them. So it got to Prahival, somehow. And in the church rafters, somehow. Lagarde is the girl's father. Weirdly enough, this is not the most well-known fact I have ever heard. I have seen posts wondering about this, but Lagarde is the girl's father. The girl from Fear and Hunger 1, the one who becomes the god of Fear and Hunger itself, is Nilvian the Eternal and Lagarde's child. Nilvian, the Endless One, visited Lagarde in a dream and they conceived a child in this dream. A child was then born in the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger, a place devoid of all hope, a place where there is no happiness or any salvation, a place where the evil of humanity is on full display with no filter. That is where the girl grew up, and it is the reason she becomes the god of Fear and Hunger. Villagers are Francis Bacon paintings. If you pay close attention to how the Moonscore's villagers look in Fear and Hunger 2, they look identical to the works of Francis Bacon. Their faces are twisted and contorted, which must have been creepy enough for Miro Havernine, the game's creator, to have an impact on him. So that's why all the villagers' faces look like that. Black matter. There is a weird food item in Fear and Hunger 2. If you go to the specific stove in the two-story house in Old Town, the one with the lady with the knives and the ritual circle in the basement, you can find a food item called black matter, which gives you 7 hunger points and poisons you. You can also feed it to Black Caliph. I have no idea why this is in the game. If you have any idea, let me know in the comments. Fear and Hunger was originally a YouTube series. Believe it or not, before it was a game, Fear and Hunger was an idea made by Miro Havernine in school. There were several ideas on how to make it a reality, one of which, that didn't really come to fruition like you wanted, was a YouTube interactive series. One where you would choose the outcome of the story, like a traditional RPG, but you'd go through videos and other videos to uncover the secrets of the dungeon based on your choices. The series didn't get very far, but you can still see it if you go way back in the channel's history. Termina is a loop. There is a theory that states the entirety of Fear and Hunger 2 is a time loop. The reasons for this is the different endings, as well as the fact that Majora's Mask is also a time loop, sort of. This can also refer to the festival also being a time loop, at least for Percola. That is, that he is looking for a suitable candidate to find more sulfur cultists and take his place. We know that there was a long time ago where Percola was once a contestant in the Termina Festival long ago. But when Rare left this world, Percola used the festival to his own ends to find more sulfur cultists. So it is kind of a loop, in that sense at least. Karen's Moonscorch form is from Elden Ring. Not literally, but there is an Elden Ring and Dark Souls YouTuber named Vati Vidya, who is very famous for his lore videos on those two games. He once held a contest to design a boss or an enemy for Elden Ring. It was a fan project, obviously, but if you look at the runner-ups, you can find Miro Havernine's creation right here, which is Karen's Moonscorch form. Heartless One and Book of Enlightenment connection. Strangely, this seemingly evil new god has a lot of light powers, which are things you would think a good guy would have, or if good guys existed in this story in the first place, I guess. But I digress. But the Heartless One's boss battle, as we've discussed, is the hardest one in the series. She has an attack where she uses these weird gold kanji symbols, which can also be found on the Book of Enlightenment. So what's the connection? I'm not sure, but there certainly is one here. Did she write the Books of Enlightenment? I'm not so sure. And if so, why? And why is she imprisoned if she wrote these clearly important books? Well, maybe we'll find out in the next update or in the next game. Strange figures in the forest. There's a certain area in the forest of Fear and Hunger 2 where you can see these weird-ass Bigfoot-like creatures. What are these? They just run away. They are looking at this hole, which can do nothing but let you unalive yourself in it. So what is any of this? Does this have any lore significance, or is this just some funny Easter egg Miro Havernine put in? Logic killed Rare/Venushka. A theory of my own creation, actually. I believe that Logic is in the process of becoming an ascended god. As we know, an ascended god is created when an old god sponsors a new god, or in this theory's case, dies to give the power to a new god to ascend them. Almer is an ascended god, which seemingly has ties to an old god or some servant of an old god that is never really talked about, named Vitruvia, the architect of the human body. In the lore, it stated that Vitruvia hated that Sylvian loved her flawed creation, and Vitruvia created a truly perfect being, Almer. I theorized she did this by either sponsoring or ending her own life to give her power to Almer, ascending him. We see the god of depths doing the same thing to the girl and making her the god of fear and hunger in Fear and Hunger 1. So I am theorizing that the reason that the Termina festival is ended when you complete the A ending is because the whole ritual would not matter anymore, because Rare gives his power, or it is taken from him perhaps, because of Logic. Another thing that points to this is the background of the fight with Logic. It is these weird wooden walls. Where else do you see these weird wooden walls? Rare's realm. And once her ascension is complete and she absorbs you, the festival is ended because the festival no longer has the power to moonscorch those who do not comply to it. However, another possibility is it is Venushka dying and giving up the power instead of Rare. It wouldn't make sense how the festival is cancelled, but after the fight is over, when Logic opens up, you can see she has the symbol of Venushka all over her. So it is interesting whatever theory you subscribe to, even if it's neither. Kahara is illiterate. This is somewhat false, but an interesting fact nonetheless. An early idea for Kahara was to have him be illiterate, and to not be able to read books or read signs if no one else was in the party with him. This would add another layer of difficulty that is just so Fear and Hunger-like, and I wish this stayed in the game, or at the very least was added in Terror and Starvation mode. The 9 chromatic blights. This is a thing mentioned in the museum in Piltover, where there is a weird tablet that mentions some new gods named the 9 chromatic blights. Chromatic meaning color. So maybe it's 9 different colored blight new gods that we haven't seen. Or perhaps the Greater Blight is one of them, and there just so happens to be 8 others we haven't seen that are just different colors or something. There is no Almer. This theory states that there never was an Almer, only ever the Sulphur God. Think of it this way. Almer is based off of Jesus Christ in Christianity. We are supposed to believe that this godly being worshipped in our time is the same one that is in Fear and Hunger that asks for human sacrifices every 3 seconds in his universe. This also goes back to that second speech of Black Caleb in Fear and Hunger 2. He will say that Almer discarded his humanity and his vanity. Caleb says he wonders which side of Almer really was discarded. Maybe it's been the Sulphur God all along. Osa even mentions how the statue of Almer looks like some bastardization of him in Osa's mind. So perhaps Almer is in the Sulphur Pits, and the Sulphur God is really the one calling all the shots in the Church of Almer and his religion as a whole. Unfound secrets. When asked on Twitter by some weird loser about the secrets in Fear and Hunger that haven't been found, Miro Havernine said there are probably secrets that have not been found in both games. Cut Father Hugo sprite. This one is very dark, perhaps one of the darkest things in the whole series that was ever added. But perhaps that's why it was cut and is non-canon. However, in earlier versions of the game, in the fight with Father Hugo when he gets naked, like he always does, it was a little different, showing that he is a marriage between him and a child. I don't really have to say what this implies, but it's really bad. Yeah, he is not a good man. The final tier, let's get into it. Fear and Hunger actually happened. Obviously, this is a joke, but it is stating that logic, after ascending, rewrites history to what we know in the real world, where there are no gods, and the old gods are not given any power because no one remembers them. Logic is the technology god after all, so perhaps she's able to change information at will, and perhaps history itself. I'd like to state once again, this is a joke theory. Every copy of Fear and Hunger is personalized. This is a joke entry that is usually on every Iceberg list, after the one in the first Iceberg video on YouTube about Mario 64 was popularized. However, in a weird, stupid way, this may be the only time that this is true in one of these lists. Statistically, every single playthrough of Fear and Hunger 1 and 2 is different. The amount of drop rates on things in every single crate and barrel is astronomically high if you put them all together. It is statistically improbable that any playthrough has ever been the same in any Fear and Hunger game. So weirdly, yes, every copy of Fear and Hunger is personalized. That is it. That is the Fear and Hunger Iceberg. I apologize for this video taking so long to come out. I've been super busy with school after I hit 10k subscribers, and I also sort of became complacent after that for a minute, and I really shouldn't have. Either way though, I love each and every one of you. And I will see you all in the next video, which should be the squirrel stapler video. See you then. Bye.